Have you ever found yourself curled up on a cold bathroom floor, wondering when home stopped feeling safe? My name is Emily Carter, and I never imagined I'd be here telling a story I once vowed would never leave these four walls. I grew up believing that if I worked hard, if I stayed quiet, if I loved my family fiercely enough, everything would work out. But sometimes, love isn't enough to keep you safe. And sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. Tonight I want to share what happened the night everything changed. They say every family has its secrets. Ours were written in silence, moments swept under rugs. Bruises explained away, tears cried quietly, so no one would notice. My younger brother Tyler was always the golden child. My parents poured their dreams into him, and in the process I became the quiet one. The easy daughter who never caused trouble, who always made room for someone else's spotlight. But one night after years of silence, the dam broke, and nothing was ever the same again. If you're watching this, maybe you know what it's like to walk on eggshells around people you love. Maybe you felt invisible in your own home, hoping that if you just tried a little harder, someone might finally see you. Or maybe you're simply here to listen, to understand, or to offer support. Wherever you are, whatever your story, thank you for being here. Your presence matters more than you know, and by hearing mine, I hope you'll feel a little less alone with yours. Before I take you back to that night, I'd like to ask for a small favor. If this story moves you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Every bit of support helps stories like mine reach people who need them most. And if you feel comfortable, share a little of your own story too. You never know who might need to hear it. Now let me take you to the moment everything shifted, where silence shattered and the journey toward healing began. Growing up, I learned quickly that being quiet was the safest way to exist in my family. If I stayed in the background, did my chores, and didn't challenge anyone's temper, life stayed manageable. My mother used to praise me for being the easy child, the one who never needed extra attention, never made a fuss at dinner, never slammed doors or shouted back. At first, I wore that label like a badge of honor. I thought if I was agreeable and invisible, I'd make my parents proud. But somewhere along the way I realized being invisible meant my needs were invisible too. There were so many little moments that taught me my place. I remember once in 6th grade, I made the honor roll and left my certificate on the kitchen table, hoping someone would notice. But that same afternoon, Tyler had a little league game, and when he hit his first home run, the whole family went out to celebrate. My certificate sat untouched, hidden beneath pizza coupons. It was a small thing, but in that moment, I learned that my victories would always come second, and sometimes they'd disappear entirely. At 13, I stopped expecting anyone to notice when I did something right. I'm not the only one who has felt this way. A close friend from high school, Mia, once told me she felt like a guest star in her own family's show, always supporting, never starring. We would laugh about it, pretending it didn't sting, but deep down we both knew that longing to be truly seen was real. It's a quiet ache that hopes someone will ask about your day, listen to your worries, or celebrate your small wins. When that validation never comes, it shapes the way you see yourself, sometimes for years. The truth is, being the quiet one can feel strangely safe and painfully lonely at the same time. It protects you from conflict, but it also isolates you from connection. Over time, I became so skilled at reading other people's moods that I forgot to check in with my own. I knew when to retreat to my room, when to take on extra chores, when to smile and say I was fine, even if I wasn't. I learned to anticipate every storm, hoping that by staying small, I could keep the peace for everyone, even if it cost me my own happiness. Looking back, the lesson I wish I had learned sooner is this: shrinking yourself to make others comfortable doesn't make you safer or more lovable. It just makes you disappear. Real love doesn't ask you to erase yourself. It invites you to take up space, to have a voice, to be messy and human. That's something I had to discover on my own, and sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones you have to teach yourself. But even small steps toward being seen, like speaking up or sharing a feeling, can open doors you never expected. As I grew older, this habit of silence followed me everywhere, to school, into friendships, and eventually back home after college. I believed that if I kept being helpful and invisible, my family would finally give me the love I longed for. But that kind of hope can turn into heartbreak, especially when it means ignoring warning signs that something is deeply wrong. That's what set the stage for everything that happened next the day. Tyler's temper crossed a line no one could ignore. My brother Tyler was always the sun in our family's universe. Everything seemed to revolve around him, his baseball tournaments, his trophies, his schedule. My parents, Linda and Greg, pinned all their hopes and dreams on Tyler's bright future. They celebrated every win, soothed every loss, and forgave every misstep, no matter how big. I remember countless times when he came home late, his excuses flimsy, but instead of being questioned, he was met with comfort and warm leftovers. I was expected to understand, to cheer him on, to keep the house running quietly in the background while he chased his next big achievement. There's a term for families like mine, where one child becomes the golden child and the rest are left in the shadows. I learned this years later reading articles about family dynamics and seeing my own childhood on the page. Tyler's mistakes, like skipping practice or coming home with a failing grade, were always brushed aside, as boys will be boys. My parents made excuses even to themselves. "He's just under a lot of pressure," Mom would whisper, or, "It's not his fault, he's tired." If I slipped up, the rules changed. My mistakes were met with disappointment or silence. One story stands out more than the rest. The night Tyler crashed Dad's car after a party, he was terrified. He called me first, sobbing and scared, and I stayed up with him until dawn. When our parents found out, they didn't yell or punish him. Instead, they circled the wagons, blamed the bad influence of his friends, paid for the repairs, and told everyone he'd hit a deer. I watched them rewrite the truth, smoothing over the mess, pretending nothing had happened. That's when I began to realize how deep the denial could run and how far my parents would go to protect the image they had built. If you've ever found yourself in a family where the rules don't apply equally, you know how lonely and confusing it can feel. You start to wonder if you're overreacting, if your memories are true, or if you're just not trying hard enough. It's easy to blame yourself, to question your worth, to believe that maybe you're the problem, not the system that keeps you quiet. But favoritism doesn't help anyone, not even the child in the spotlight. It places a weight on them too, a pressure to be perfect, a fear of ever falling short. Looking back, the lesson is painfully clear. When a family enables bad behavior in the name of love, it doesn't create safety or closeness. It creates secrets, resentment, and a pattern of excusing harm. Tyler grew up believing he was untouchable, and I grew up believing my role was to keep the peace at any cost. Neither of us learned what real accountability or unconditional love truly meant. That's why when Tyler's anger finally erupted, none of us were ready for the consequences. In the next part, I'll share how one ordinary night shattered the silence we'd all been taught to keep. It happened on a night that started out like so many others, quiet, tense, but familiar. Tyler had just lost an important baseball game, and the house was filled with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. My parents sat in the living room, glued to the TV, their faces tight with disappointment they tried not to show. When Tyler finally walked in, I could smell the frustration clinging to him like sweat. His footsteps were heavy, and his eyes searched the room for somewhere to put his anger. He slammed the fridge door so hard that it rattled the shelves, then grabbed a drink and muttered under his breath about the coach, the umpire, even the weather. I tried like always to smooth things over. "It's just one game," I said gently. "You'll get them next time." But instead of softening, his expression darkened. Before I knew it, he turned on me, accusing me of not understanding, of being dismissive, of making light of his pain. His words felt sharp and wild, like he was looking for a fight, and that night I was the nearest target. The argument escalated quickly, fueled by months, maybe years of swallowed resentments. Tyler's voice rose. My parents' silence deepened, and before I could even react, his anger spilled over into action. One shove was all it took for my world to tilt. Pain exploded across my ribs as I hit the edge of the counter, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. I remember the stunned look on Tyler's face, the sound of my mother's gasp, the way my father didn't move from his chair. In that moment, time slowed down. Everything I'd tried to hold together came apart in one violent heartbeat. The hardest part wasn't the pain, though. It was sharp and real. The hardest part was the look on my parents' faces, shocked, yes, but not at Tyler. They looked at me as if I had broken some unspoken rule, as if I had let the family down by making the problem visible. My mother rushed to my side, but her words weren't of comfort, they were warnings. Don't make this bigger than it is. Tyler needs you to be strong. Don't ruin his chances. In those words, I heard a lifetime of lessons about silent sacrifice and keeping peace no matter the cost. Looking back, I realized that night was inevitable. When families ignore warning signs and excuse patterns of anger or cruelty, they create the perfect conditions for things to go terribly wrong. The real danger isn't just the outburst, it's the slow erosion of boundaries and trust that leads up to it. My family's refusal to acknowledge Tyler's temper didn't protect him, and it certainly didn't protect me. Instead, it left us all more vulnerable. In the next part, I'll share how the silence that followed shaped what happened next, and why pretending nothing happened can sometimes do the most lasting harm. After the chaos of that night settled into uneasy silence, something even more insidious took its place: denial. My mother's first instinct was not to comfort me, but to craft a version of events that would keep Tyler safe. She whispered, "You slipped. You hit the counter. Please, Emily, don't make this worse." My father repeated the story like a mantra, as if saying it enough times could turn it into truth. They convinced themselves and tried to convince me that nothing truly terrible had happened. Their words blurred the line between accident and violence, rewriting history right before my eyes. This kind of denial has a name: gaslighting. It's what happens when people you trust make you doubt your own reality. At first, I wanted to believe them. I told myself maybe I really had slipped, maybe it was my fault for being in the way. But each time I pressed my hand to my aching ribs, I felt the weight of what I was being asked to carry. Families don't just hide secrets. They also ask their children to protect them. My parents wanted to keep their world in order, even if it meant leaving me alone with my pain and confusion. I learned later that I was not alone in this experience. A classmate from college, Rachel, once confided in me about her father's anger and her mother's endless excuses. She told me how she would stand in the bathroom rehearsing the story she was told to say, just like I had. The shame, she said, was not just in what happened, but in being forced to pretend it hadn't. It's a lonely place to be surrounded by people, but completely unseen. In both our families, silence was loyalty, and loyalty was survival. The lesson that slowly emerged was difficult but necessary. Pretending everything is fine does not make it so. If anything, it deepens the wound, isolating you from others and from yourself. In those days after the incident, I walked through my house like a ghost. My family moved on, planning Tyler's next game, talking about the weather, laughing at sitcom reruns. Meanwhile, I learned to mask my pain with practiced smiles. Every time I let their version of events take over, I felt myself shrinking a little more, becoming less real and less present in my own life. Looking back, I know that this silence was just as harmful as the violence. By denying what had happened, my parents weren't protecting our family, they were burying it under a mountain of secrets and shame. It wasn't until someone outside our circle saw through the act that things finally began to change. In the next part, I'll share how a doctor's gentle questions became the lifeline I didn't know I needed, and how the smallest spark of honesty can begin to break even the deepest silence. A few days after the incident, my father took me to a local urgent care clinic. The car ride was quiet. He kept his eyes on the road, repeating, "Remember, you fell in the kitchen." I nodded, too tired to argue. When we arrived, a kind nurse took my vitals and led me to an exam room. Soon Dr. Elizabeth Nguyen came in. She was calm, patient, and spoke to me like I mattered. When she gently pressed on my ribs, I winced, and tears sprang to my eyes. She paused, looked at me carefully, and then did something no one else had done. She asked if I was really okay. Dr. Nguyen studied the bruises on my side, her brow furrowed with concern. She didn't rush. "Emily," she said softly, "the pattern of your injuries doesn't look like a simple fall. If there's something else going on, you can tell me. You're safe here." Her words made my breath catch. For the first time, I felt someone truly saw me, not just the version my family wanted the world to believe. I wanted to tell her everything, but fear and loyalty wrestled inside me. I shook my head, whispering, "I just fell," but she didn't push. Instead, she gave me her card and said I could call her anytime. Later that day, as I stared at the doctor's card, I thought of all the small moments when I'd stayed silent to keep the peace. I remembered a friend from my old job, Monica, who once told me about the nurse who'd encouraged her to leave an abusive relationship. Sometimes Monica said the right person asking the right question can change everything. That night I found myself dialing Dr. Nguyen's number. I cried as I explained the truth. She listened, no judgment, just kindness. She promised she would help me, and for the first time in a long time, I believed someone could. The lesson I learned was simple but life-changing. One person's courage to listen can become someone else's courage to speak. Dr. Nguyen's compassion didn't just treat my injuries, it opened a door I thought was forever locked. By trusting her, I took the first step out of my silence. That step didn't erase the pain, but it planted hope. Real healing, I was learning, often begins in the quiet spaces where someone says, "I see you and I believe you." After Dr. Nguyen's call, everything began to shift. My family's story no longer held all the power. The truth had started to find its voice, and with that, my journey toward real change had begun. In the next part, I'll share how the aftermath of breaking the silence turned my world upside down, and why standing up for yourself can sometimes mean standing alone, at least for a while. The days after I finally told Dr. Nguyen the truth were some of the loneliest I've ever known. Word traveled quickly, first to social services, then to law enforcement, and finally back home. My family's reaction was immediate and absolute. My parents turned cold, accusing me of betrayal. "You've ruined everything," my mother sobbed over the phone. "Do you want to see your brother's life destroyed?" My father barely spoke to me except for the text messages. "I hope you're happy. We're done with you." Suddenly, I was no longer the quiet daughter, I was the family traitor. My brother Tyler was suspended from the team, his friends stopped coming around. My parents stopped calling altogether, except for the occasional voicemail, pleading for me to fix this or to retract my statement. I would listen, tears streaming down my face, wondering if speaking out had been a mistake. I knew the truth, but it was a truth no one seemed to want. The silence in the house I once called home became suffocating. Every childhood photo, every memory suddenly felt sharp and dangerous reminders of what I had lost by daring to be honest. In moments like these, I drew comfort from stories of others who had walked similar paths. At a support group, I met a woman named Grace, who told me about standing up to her own family after years of mistreatment. "They'll call you selfish," she said quietly. "But really, you're just choosing yourself for the first time." That idea helped me. I learned that sometimes telling the truth doesn't bring applause or rescue. Sometimes it brings backlash and loneliness. But even in that isolation, there's the first taste of real freedom, freedom from secrets, from pretending, from carrying someone else's shame. What I wish I'd known sooner is that the pain of being cast out is temporary, but the relief of being true to yourself is lasting. There's a strange peace in knowing you finally stood up for your own story, even if no one else stands with you. I began to see that being rejected by my family wasn't the end, it was the beginning of finding my own strength and redefining what family meant to me. Sometimes losing what you thought you couldn't live without is the only way to discover what you truly deserve. As the dust settled and the noise faded, I realized I needed to rebuild from scratch a new home, new routines, and new people who would support me for who I was, not who I pretended to be. In the next part, I'll share how those first steps toward healing looked messy, lonely, but also surprisingly hopeful. Because even after everything, life still offers us second chances to choose ourselves and to find a place where our truth is welcome. Starting over was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I moved into a tiny studio apartment on the edge of Portland, a space that felt empty and echoing yet undeniably mine. The first nights I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar hum of the city, wrestling with loneliness and doubt. There were days I missed my family so much it hurt, but I knew that going back meant returning to silence and secrets. Bit by bit, I filled my days with small acts of self-care, unpacking my books, tending a little succulent by the window, and making tea in the mornings just the way I liked. Therapy became a lifeline. Sitting in that softly lit room across from Dr. Allen, I learned to put words to feelings I'd buried for years. At first, I was hesitant, unsure if my pain counted, still tempted to minimize my experiences. But Dr. Allen never rushed me or made me feel broken. Instead, she listened. We talked about the old habits I'd formed, always reading the room, always putting others first, rarely asking for help. Slowly, I realized that healing didn't mean forgetting the past, but learning how to live with it and make different choices moving forward. Real community came from unexpected places. I joined a local support group for survivors of family trauma. There I met people of all ages and backgrounds, each with a story to tell. Some were years into their healing journeys. Others, like me, were just beginning. We shared meals, laughed about our awkward attempts at cooking, and cheered each other on for small victories, like getting through a hard week or setting a healthy boundary. One member, Lila, became a close friend. She showed me how to reclaim simple joys, from trying out new hiking trails to hosting movie nights in our pajamas. The biggest lesson from those early months was that asking for help isn't weakness, it's an act of courage. For so long, I believed I had to survive alone, that leaning on others was a burden. But what I found was the opposite: vulnerability. Open doors to trust, friendship, and genuine support. No one's journey looks the same, and healing is never a straight line. There were setbacks and days when old fears resurfaced, but with each honest conversation and gentle act of self-kindness, the grip of the past loosened a little more. As seasons changed and my apartment grew warmer with new memories, I realized I was building something precious, a life rooted in honesty and hope, not fear. It wasn't about forgetting where I'd come from, but about honoring the strength it took to keep going. In the next part, I'll share how my pain became a catalyst for something bigger, a project dedicated to helping others find their voices, so none of us would have to heal alone ever again. In time, I realized that my story, once a source of shame, could become a force for change. One afternoon, while sipping coffee with Lila, we talked about how many survivors feel isolated, believing they're the only ones carrying family secrets. That conversation sparked an idea. What if there was a place where people could gather, be heard, and know they weren't alone? With encouragement from my therapist and friends, I started planning a small community program, which I called the Brave Voices Project. The goal was simple: offer support groups, creative workshops, and a safe space for anyone struggling to reclaim their sense of self. The first meeting was intimate. Just 6 of us gathered in a cozy church basement, surrounded by mismatched chairs and trays of homemade cookies. Each person brought something different: grief, hope, fear, and a quiet courage that filled the room. I shared my own story and invited others to do the same if and when they were ready. As weeks passed, the group grew. We painted, wrote poems, and held open mic nights, where voices once silenced rang out clear and proud. One young woman, Maya, stood up one evening to read a letter she'd written to her younger self. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Seeing people find their voice was powerful, but it also reminded me of how hard it is to take that first step. Maya later told me she almost didn't come to the group afraid of being judged or misunderstood. But when I heard your story, I realized I wasn't broken, I was just hurting, she said. That moment taught me that healing multiplies when shared. We can't erase the past, but together we can help each other carry it. Every time someone speaks their truth, it lights the way for someone else who still feels lost in the dark. The lesson I treasure most from the Brave Voices Project is this: no act of courage is ever wasted. Even the smallest choice to show up, to listen, to share can ripple outward and create real change. None of us need to be perfect or fully healed to make a difference. Our imperfect, unfinished stories can offer hope to those who are just starting. For the first time, I understood the deep joy of giving back, not from a place of sacrifice, but from a place of connection and genuine empathy. Looking back, it's clear that what began as a journey through pain grew into something brighter than I could have imagined. In the final part of my story, I'll bring you to a moment that changed everything: a public stand for truth and the peace I found by embracing my voice. Thank you for being with me so far. I hope my journey reminds you that your voice matters too. Standing before a crowded room at the Brave Voices Project's first anniversary event, I felt both nervous and grounded. As I shared my journey from invisible daughter to survivor to someone unafraid to speak up, I caught glimpses of others nodding, some wiping away tears. Tyler was there in the back, quiet and withdrawn. Our eyes met for a moment, and instead of anger or fear, I felt only calm. I realized I no longer needed an apology or acceptance from my family to know my worth. My peace came from within, shaped by the courage it took to stand in my own truth. I looked out at a sea of faces, friends, old and new members, who once whispered, now ready to shout their stories. Each person's presence reminded me that healing is possible, and community can grow from even the hardest beginnings. I spoke about the pain of being unseen, the courage of breaking silence, and the gift of finding support outside of blood ties. Every challenge along my path, loneliness, starting over, learning to ask for help, had prepared me to lift up others who still struggle to be heard. Our voices joined together had become a force for hope. Looking back, I see now that life's hardest moments can plant the seeds for something beautiful. I learned that bravery isn't loud or perfect, it's showing up again and again, even when you're scared. I discovered the power of small acts, a kind word, a helping hand, a place to belong. My story is just one among many, but together our voices can make sure no one ever feels invisible again. If you followed my journey, thank you for listening, for supporting, and for believing that change is possible, even when it starts as a whisper. If my story has touched you, please consider subscribing to this channel, liking this video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from, or share a bit of your own journey if you feel safe. Your voice can light the way for someone else who needs it. Let's build a community where everyone is seen, heard, and valued. No more secrets, no more shame. Together we can make silence a thing of the past and create a future where healing is possible for all. Thank you for being here. You are not alone, and your story matters.